Greetings, it is I, Tentis Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on reviewing anime series and then giving you some suggestions on how to use them in your BESM games. Generally, how to adapt them to a role-playing game system. So today, I of course have two more from the current season of Winter 2017, plus a couple more from 2015 as we continue our going back in time. Let's talk about the two from this season. I'm first starting with the second season of Konosuba and Schoolgirl Stirkers. But let's start with Konosuba, or Kono Subarashii Sekai ni Shukufuku. So this series focuses on a young high school, basically, NEET, shut-in, who dies in a very embarrassing way. Kazuma. So he finds himself in what could be best called an afterlife, meeting with this goddess, Aqua. Aqua basically gives him this opportunity to reincarnate, to be reborn in this fantasy world that's effectively a MMORPG, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. It has a lot of rules based around that, so he's going to become just basically himself in this world. She gives him the option to basically take some kind of artifact or magic item or something of power with him to this world. She's pretty demeaning towards him, so he ends up getting kind of angry with her and effectively says, "I'm taking you." This gets approved by whatever higher beings are above her. She ends up in the world with him, which unfortunately she proves relatively useless. The two of them do form an adventuring team because the point of this world is to adventure and defeat this Demon King. They kind of feel like they're not going to get it. They recruit a few other people to their ragtag team, but kind of Kazuma gives up on defeating Demon King and decides just to live a really great life in this world. Because his ragtag kind of group just doesn't work very well together. None of them have really great abilities together. They're the kind of people that were shunned out of other groups, and they effectively have now assembled into one. Yeah. So, though they end up, in the course of the series, fighting and defeating some of the Demon King's lieutenants, and effectively, not by choice, end up actually helping out the cause of defeating the Demon King. Go figure on that one. So the genres for this one are, of course, comedy. It's really silly. I mean, I'm sorry. The characters are ridiculous in and of themselves. Even Kazuma, who tends to be the straight man, has really terrible abilities and doesn't learn very good MMO abilities. And he himself is not really a great guy. So it's sort of like a lot of the situations are he's got a ridiculous team of people around him. He himself is not really great enough to be the true straight man in this group. So it has a lot of comedic situations. Fantasy, of course. There's monsters and magic and everything like that. It has a very huge fantasy element. That's the kind of thing it's supposed to be. It's also, I'm calling it MMORPG. There have been a whole lot of MMORPG animes that have come out. Not an infinite amount of them, but there's been a good amount of them that I would call it its own genre by this point in time. Truly been enough of them just to call that. I rate this one a 4. I actually enjoyed it a lot, just because the comedy did keep me coming into it and enjoying it. This is technically the second season of it, which is out this season of anime. So if you want to check it out, I would recommend, of course, starting with the first season, but both of them are very good. Now, if you're using this in a BESM game, I'd recommend 300 points. You're going to make your players a group of characters who come from the real world. They effectively have died, more than likely in some kind of stupid, embarrassing way, and all of them have ended up together in the same place in afterlife. They all get reincarnated into this world. Now, it is completely up to you if you want to take some similar roots to the anime and have the goddess character that's with them effectively end up with them. You really should have your characters wish for stupid stuff, because it's funnier that way. They're not going to wish for, like, the all-powerful artifact or special super powerful spell. One of them might wish for the goddess to go with them. A couple of them might wish for something stupid. Work it out with your players what they're going to wish for when they come into the world, which is going to help establish them when they're coming into this world. You'd probably then want to go throw a couple of NPCs that you create into their group to sort of fill out their ragtag group of useless people. Because they effectively are going to sort of be similar, that they shouldn't be a great team. They should be a dysfunctional team. And they probably aren't going to be aiming to defeat the Demon King. But you should allow for situations where they can defeat minions of the Demon King successfully and greatly. Come up with weaknesses that might be based around them, things that they can discover, little things like that that could give them the advantage in their abilities. It's up to you to craft that properly, and you don't want to handhold them into these situations. If they get in trouble, they get in trouble, but you want to make it established that if they can figure it out, it'll get them the win. Now let's move on and talk about Schoolgirl Stirkers. Now this one focuses on a sort of near future where in Japan a newly formed girls' school exists. And what the thing is that there is another group deep below it. There's a group called the Fifth Force, which is made up from students from this school, effectively recruited from it, that have this unique abilities that allow them to basically fight against these beings from the fifth dimension, the Obori, which are invading and attacking our world. So they form up into divisions, and they basically then fight against these things, helping protect our world. We focus on one team, Altair Forte, who is this newly formed team with a leader that has kind of a little bit of amnesia. But the fact is, this group is learning to work together. They're not very successful when we start out our series. They're coming into their abilities and becoming stronger. Now for the genres of this one, it's an action. They go into battles using various kind of weapons. Each one of them seems to have some kind of different weapons. You know, it comes up with action scenes fighting against these monsters. It's a sci-fi. It feels very futuristic with fifth dimensional things, and their powers seem very sci-fi based, if anything, that they have, you know, a little transformations and stuff like that. Now, I was debating for the last one, calling it a little bit of a magical girl because they do have a transformation into their abilities, but unfortunately, I think this is a little too step far back from that one. Just because they activate their abilities and sort of it switches out their clothes to their battle clothes with like a beam of light doesn't automatically make it a magical girl. I think it only has a little bit of those elements, and it's supposed to be more technology based, and that they're born with the ability to fight against them, but they can use this technology properly. So that's why I'm not going to say that. Instead, I'm going to say school, because it revolves around their school life a lot too, that each of them goes to school and has a normal life on the side. You know, each of them has different things they're doing in the course of their school day, which pertains to themselves, while at the same time, they balance out this dual life, and I think that's a little more important than calling it a magical girl. I rate this one a 4. Now, if you're using this a BESM game, I'd recommend 400 points. They're going to be a team of girls from the Fifth Force. They're probably going to be a new team. You're probably, basically, you as the GM are going to see which character would pertain best to leader from the skills they choose. You're going to choose effectively one person to be the leader, and the rest of them will figure out the rules in general. But they're all going to technically get along, and the point of it is for them to develop this relationships with each other, to get better at working together, develop the fact that they are a team because they are pretty much just thrown together at this point in time, more meeting each other. And at the same time, they should balance out their school lives with the fact that they're fighting against the Obori and trying to protect the world. And all the time, they're trying to get better at both of them and still be successful at both of them. And it will be a little bit of that balancing act while having those action scenes against these creatures from another dimension that will make up the bulk of what you're doing when you're running it. Now let's move on to the 2 from 2015. I've got Sengoku Musou and Isuca. So Sengoku Musou is basically an anime adaptation of a video game series, Samurai Warriors. It's an adaptation of the 4th Samurai Warriors game, Part 2. There's a lot more Samurai Warriors games than there are animes, of course. Anyway, regardless, so it's taking place in the Sengoku area, where one of the Warring States people had effectively gained a big control of Japan, and upon his deathbed, effectively his son was supposed to take over. But there was a faction within the group that didn't believe his son was ready for it, so there was this fracturing, and this battle began between these two sides. We focus on the story of these two brothers, who end up on either side of this conflict. That each of them wants to live up to the idealism of their family, their clan, but each of them has their own idealism and reasons why they're joining with these two sides. So effectively, as these two groups come to head, these two brothers come to head. Now, for genres for this one, I call it an action. They have a lot of big battle scenes, it's war, it's going on, it's all these fights, and of course these characters here are fighting with each other. They're the big characters. These would be the, player characters or big NPC bosses in the video game, and that's what they effectively represent. It's also historical. Granted, it's not a very good historical, because it's more based on the video game, but the video game is technically based on an actual historical period. It's just a very much so embellished version of it. So there is this historical thread of the characters were actually real, even though these are not real versions of them. I'd also call it a samurai, because we're doing samurai-based history. They are samurai warriors. It's the old Sengoku period. It's traditional warring state samurai kind of thing. So yes, it's definitely samurai. I rated it a 3. It was interesting, but I wasn't as big on the video games. I think if you're a fan of the Samurai Warriors series, then yeah, you're gonna love this. For me, I wasn't big a fan of it, but it was still a pretty decent anime. Now, if you're using this in a BESM game, I'd recommend 250 points. You're going to make your characters historical figures from this time period. Now, granted, you can either use one copying it sort of from the anime or the video games, or you could come up with your own version of one of them if you wanted to redesign it based on whatever historical information you could put together from it. No, it doesn't have to be accurate, it just has to be generally in the same vein, I'd say. But regardless, you are then going to be on one side of this conflict, the entire group of characters, the players. You could either have it that you as the GM determine that, or if the players themselves have an idea of what side of this conflict they want to be on, then go ahead and do that. And you'll fill out the roster of NPCs that they'll be opposed to in the sides of these conflict, and you might want to use, of course, this entire ideal of people they know, people that are either friends, family, loved ones, are on the other side of it, and that they're going to have to fight with them and deal with them at some point in time. So it will be this family going head-to-head almost. But again, you could also use other loved ones, friends, whatever. It's just that the two sides of the conflict should be people that were really close at one point in time, and now they're going to have to deal with defeating them and getting their goals, their side's goals, to the top. So let's move on and talk about Isuca. Now, Isuca focuses around this high school boy, Shichiro, who ends up getting this basically job as a housekeeper in order to effectively pay his rent. Now, along the way, though, he accidentally summons some kind of supernatural being, and it turns out that his basically employer, Sakia, is the head of this clan of warriors who deals with supernatural beings. So it ends up that he gets sort of recruited by her in order to fight against the various supernatural beings. He has this ability that when he basically kisses a being that's a supernatural being or a person with supernatural powers, he learns this intricate information about them he can use to effectively control them to a degree. And so he has a very powerful ability himself, just not directly. He just basically can influence other things with supernatural beings if he kisses them. So the genres of this one, of course, supernatural. It's got supernatural monsters, supernatural powers. So of course it's supernatural. It's a harem. He ends up kissing a lot of people and getting influence, of course, with his employer, Sakia. That's sort of the main girl of it, but there's other girls in the entire circle of it that he ends up sort of being at the center of a, not a huge harem, but it still exists there, that there definitely are a bunch of girls that like him, and it's sort of like hard to say sometimes if it's the influence of his ability, or the fact that he is actually really generally a nice guy too anyway. So it kind of earns it without having the fact that he doesn't use this ability to his maximum potential that he could to if he was some kind of villain or something. Now it's also an action. There are plenty of action scenes fighting supernatural monsters in supernatural battles against other people. So there's plenty of action scenes to make it fill into that point in time that makes you feel good. I rate this one a 4. The harem elements, I'm always kind of mixed about harem elements, but I think the action elements are really good, and it's a cool supernatural premise in the first place. So I think those make up for the fact that, interesting setting, cool action. I can live with a little harem element sitting there too. Now, if you're using this in BESM game, I recommend 350 points. You're going to make your team a group of characters that you'll have some people with supernatural abilities. Maybe you'll have one or two basically supernatural type creatures which are joining it that have decided to ally with humans rather than go on rampages and help them fight against the dangerous supernatural creatures. And regardless though, this team of characters, supernatural base powers, supernatural creatures, team together to fight other supernatural creatures or people that might have supernatural powers that are trying to damage the world and be a threat against it. In the same time, you're going to balance that they have a little bit of their normal kind of school life, and you should try to develop some romantic relationships between them, maybe each other, maybe some NPCs that you can establish, and getting a little bits of harem elements between some of the characters is not something I would scoff away from. I might even recommend it for some of it, just to add a little bit more of that element of the original anime into your game as you're playing it. So that's it for today. I introduced you to 4 more anime, and of course I talked about how you can adapt your BESM games to each of them and use them like that. Granted, these suggestions do work for some other gaming systems. Some of them are easier to adapt than others. BESM, I'm giving you most of the rules to adapt it to very quickly and easily. But if you wanted to use these settings in other various role-playing games, go ahead. Again, requires a little bit more work on your end, but it can be worth it. But regardless, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link description below. But until the next time, I bid you farewell.